Hi there and welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about an actual mass killer, not Miss Letby. She was simply labelled one through the mercenary instincts of certain legal professionals willing to accept character smears, fraudulent statistics, and scientific skullduggery as suitable materials to work with. Anyway, I want to share my thoughts on the motive of Southwold killer Axel Rudakubana. Assuming he was acting of his own free will, I believe that he was deranged by Gaza and lashing out at perceived hypocrisy in our response to that daily holocaust of our moral values, human sensibilities, and even the concept of truth itself. This conclusion on his motive was first arrived at towards the end of that week in which his identity was first disclosed. Now, given that our government is at least complicit, if not active, in that genocide, I pretty much knew there and then that his motive was unlikely to be debated, and so it has proved. That absence of media activity has only further persuaded me that my intuition on his motive is correct, because the near total media blackout is unmistakable evidence of government coyness on the case. The media is always in lockstep but subservient to the state in these matters, so they're passing up on the opportunity in the lead up to the trial next year, I believe, to milk even the most milk the aspects of the case that would not come within the possibility of contempt of court. You know, the more trivial, innocuous aspects of his background and so on. That is the clearest evidence that the government is very hands-on in managing perceptions of the case. That coyness is most glaringly evidenced by the continued use of childhood photos of him by the media. It is extremely unlikely that he, as a teenager in 2024, did not have a social media footprint. If somehow that was the case, the majority of his friends and family most certainly wouldn't have. Therefore, their social media accounts would doubtless include more images of him, even if only from celebratory occasions and so on. They also would not have had the option of closing ranks to protect his images, because, as you should all be aware, with the possible exception of Telegram, the secret intelligence services and maybe even the authorities in general have ready access to all social media platforms. Also, those child photos of him had to have come from somewhere, and the source of them is it's just improbable that wherever they were sourced did not also include more recent images of him. So the only conclusion to draw is that the media does actually have more recent images, but is withholding them under orders. I would guess these orders would be necessary because the authorities haven't yet settled on how to best firewall his case away from any questioning from the already existing questioning of the UK's role in the tragedy of Gaza. Accordingly, they need to keep public debate muted and neutral as you can after riots up and down the country, of course. Before going further, I need to make something clear. There's no such thing as a motiveless act where choice has been possible. The senseless act thing is a fiction. In actual fact, if you look at it hard enough, it is the illegitimate sibling of those legal fiction tweaks of reality which abound throughout the legal system. The unexplainable senseless act is just a fable created long ago by the media and their handlers in government to head off our thinking before we get to some motive reflection on which might cause us to then look with new eyes on one of the government or media narratives that previously we'd accepted in an unquestioning way. The other thing it is used for is to demonize a particular act or individual, or to perpetuate the demonization of a previously demonized group or possibly species of behavior. This will either be for direct or indirect political gain purposes, or simply to sell papers, boost viewing figures, or generate clicks. Everything I've just said about the senseless act fiction is equally applicable to the other favourite in these circumstances, that being the pure evil one. That one is nothing more or nothing less than just the red top tabloid version of the senseless act fiction, basically dumbed down, tailored to less educated minds. No, human beings do not do acts which involve planning, separate operations, personal risk, and blood without motive. Rudakubana had to target that class on that day, or target the class, choose a day, decide how he was going to carry out his attack, to acquire his weapon, then make his way to the location in a way which didn't involve him crossing paths with the police or something. And then having got there, then go into that building, up those stairs, and carry out the most this attack in the most personal of circumstances. That final stage especially would have obviously involved grave personal risk, not just to his liberty, which he's obviously lost, but to his life, because there is no way he would have known that he could have known rather that the nearest police vehicle to the location wouldn't be one of the armed response vehicles which are constantly on patrol up and down the country. And that being the case, it's almost certain that he would have been shot dead that day. As soon as the first sight of him with that knife, he'd have been shot. Okay, having dealt with the motiveless act fallacy, I'll speak of the reasoning which gave rise to my intuition on his motive. My starting point was the almost cast iron principle that no one, least of all a 17-year-old, can hate enough to do what Rudakubana did, and the almost as safe principle that no one could be paid enough to do it either. See, no one can put a price, no one would put a price on their future mental health. If the motive therefore wasn't malice or money, the best clue as to what it actually was as I saw it, was to be found in looking at the act, the event itself, and the reasonably anticipated impact it could be expected to have. The attack plainly was something calculated to have the maximum emotional and psychological impact on society. As such, it was the definitive politically motivated action. Given the youth of the attacker, that had me trying to work out how some entity or organization for whom the possibly predictable civil unrest which followed on afterwards might have been something which they had identified in advance as an opportunity of a political or economic nature, how some entity with those kind of designs and ambitions might have kind of like not forced him to do it, but made him do it, controlled him into doing it. At that time, I simply couldn't conceive. This is prior to his identity being disclosed. I couldn't conceive of a 17-year-old being politicized enough to actually do something like to feel strongly enough to do something like this of their own volition. Big change. The big change was in the 48 hours, 24 to 48 hours after the disclosure of his identity. With the disclosure of it, I just immediately took it for granted that civil unrest would just end there and then. So I was taken aback, taken off guard when it just continued. As if nothing had really changed. That obliged me to look with new eyes at the whole situation. In doing that, the elephant in the room for me was the question of what the millions of brown-skinned teenagers up and down the UK might be thinking and feeling about the unfolding events. Ultimately, after the continued unrest, following the disclosure of his identity, the question of whether his ethnicity alone was what was driving the unrest was one which at least some of those kids would have been asking themselves. Now, it was with that reflection on the possibility of non-white teenagers in this country becoming alienated by what was going on, that it was with that the idea of alienation now being in my mind, that it suddenly hit me that alienation could also explain Rudakubana's attack. It was certainly conceivable that he had acted on his own volition in consequence of having come to the end of his tether in some emotional sense at something in the world around him which was not as it purported to be, or in terms of his own worldview was not behaving or being as it ought to be. And obviously this would be something sufficiently powerful to go right to the core of his personal principles. Putting that together with his quite deliberate targeting of children, GAZA leapt into the picture. The clincher for me was my own dark psychological journey on the same issue. If I say so myself, I am a well-educated man. I'm also of mature years. But without a shadow of a doubt, I am a different person to who I was at the beginning of October of 2023. I also know that I will never be that person again, nor return to that state of relative innocence on geopolitical matters which I didn't even know I possessed. As such, if the moral dystopia which remains after such a holocaust of values, sensibilities, and even truth itself could have such an impact on me as a mature adult, how much greater could that impact be on one with the uninformed, uncompromising moral certitudes of a 17-year-old? I believe that in making a point of targeting children in that way, Rudakubana was screaming at British society, "How do you feel when it's your children being murdered?" If we discard both insanity and external mind control, as I think we reasonably can, then unpalatable as it might be to a lot of you watching this, my thesis on his motive is the closest to an intellectually credible explanation for the killing of those innocents last August. I must also add here that while we have a duty to try to understand bad events, to hopefully learn from them, it makes absolutely no difference what the motive is behind an evil act. Evil is evil. Axel Rudakubana chose to do a monstrous thing. The responsibility for that does not and can never extend beyond his own personhood. To start putting evil acts in any kind of context is to take the first step down the road to becoming the sociopath, to becoming like the sociopaths and psychopaths who populate our governmental and media elites. It is to go onto the path of psychopathology and evil which made Gaza even possible in the first place. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about the Southport killer's motive. Please feel free to share your own thoughts in the comments section below, and as usual, thank you for watching, thank you for your time, and all the best.